So, all right. Nice to have you here again after this short exercise with the fire alarm. Topic again, we're starting from the beginning, is today coupling for decoupling. We're talking about content federation. And before we start this little exercise, we already realized that two of the people in the room are actually knowing about the term content federation, the rest not. And we will dig in today a little bit into that topic. So that means that we are doing a kind of wrap up from legacy architecture into decoupled architectures. What are the challenges of decoupled architectures and so on and so far, and then realize why we need a kind of term which is called content federation. As mentioned before, we're warming up with some numbers. And basically, if we're looking on organizations and we are following some statistics, then we see that 1/3 on average of organizations is basically made of legacy technology. What's personally interesting for me is also that those decision makers say 60 to 80% of the IT investments are going into legacy architectures just to keep them up and running. And this means, on the opposite, that 40% or 20%, depending on how you count it, is just used for innovation or defining user experience. Yeah, the rest is just spent for getting everything up and running. And this is pretty interesting for me if we're talking about how markets are changing, how customer demand is changing in that case. And what is also super interesting is that 90% of the business actually is holding back from legacy architecture. Just to warm you up with some numbers and get into the topic why everybody is actually decoupling and trying to get out legacy. Observable problems on legacy architecture, I guess you all know that, basically are referring to scalability, which means you're dealing with traffic pipes, server scaling, data imports, which you're doing over the night, try to squeeze everything into data daisy chains and so on and so far. Try to squeeze the last time window into the night to scale the infrastructure. So everyone who's working in e-commerce sphere should be quite familiar with that if he or she is running on legacy technology. On the other side, we are seeing that we are limited in terms of innovation. That means that we're not able to ship new features because we're not able to access the data properly. We're not able to build a user engaging front end, for example. And that means that you're also falling a little bit back behind the market. Sorry. Legacy architecture is also slowing down the transformation process. So that means if you're focusing on running legacy architecture and you're the whole day, let's say, occupied with dealing with constraints, dependencies on teams, and so on and so far, you can't invest basically into transformation in that case. And of course, you have increasing costs. And I would like to dig into the next chart, which explains that cost topic a little bit. What you see here is basically the so-called IT budget dilemma. That means in the end, hope you see that, that you over the time are spending more cost of your IT budget for running architecture, changing architecture, rather innovating architecture. And in the same time, the user experience is just going up, which means you have IT budget, a CIO, CTO, whatsoever, and this budget is basically eaten up by just running and changing architecture in that case, if you don't transform that architecture. Does it make sense for you? Cool. So if we observe that on a technical point of view, we also should reflect how markets in general are moving forward. And basically, you might have heard the term which is called VUCA. Does anybody know VUCA? Some are nicking, some are not. So let's explain it. So actually, the whole market conditions are basically infected by this VUCA term. Yeah. So VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. To explain that to you a little bit, volatility means that we have a fluctuation on the market. So we have traffic peaks on the one side, but on the other side, from a not technical perspective, we might have also users which are not that engaged or loyal to the brand, and they are just changing the brand, shopping on another store. So we have a volatility on the tech side as well on the user side. We have uncertainty. That means that global delivery chains are breaking down. Wars are starting, and we can't predict the future in the end. Yeah, which means we're trying to overcome that, adding more systems, which is raising complexity in the end. And on the last term, we have that ambiguity topic, which means that we have several contexts just for one system. Yeah. And to put it in a nut, you can say that the only thing for the future, what we can do is, what we can predict is that everything will change. So that is the only constant which we can see, and we have to reflect that later on in the infrastructure. Sorry, I have just to grab some water. So if we ask ourselves, what is the impact of legacy architecture combined with a fast-changing markets, I would say that we're not able to grab new opportunities if we're staying on legacy architecture, and we're not able to build engaging user experiences. Most often we see that companies try to overcome that by adding quick and dirty solutions, which just generally adds more tech debt to the whole infrastructure itself. Yeah. So from a technical point of view, I would say that you can say that adaptivity and flexibility in the whole tech stack is getting the new competitive edge. Yeah. So that means, here you see the slide moving, no? Okay. It did move. No, we should go back to that one. So you see me a little bit scared pressing the presenter after the last time. Okay, so as mentioned, adaptivity and flexibility is basically getting the competitive edge, yeah? Because if we're adaptive and flexible, we're able to adapt new technology, we're adapt new use cases, or trying out new topics in that case. If we're not adaptive and flexible, we will fall behind the markets because markets are moving faster. So that's what we learned. And that means also that the infrastructure itself should be the enabler and not the constraint, in my opinion. Yeah. So this is super important to see that. If we're talking right now over decoupled infrastructure itself, I would say that decoupled infrastructure, as you might know, has his perks. Yeah. Perks are in general all the drawbacks which legacy architecture has, meaning they're much more scalable, they're much more flexible. You have a technology diversity, meaning the team can just run what they need on the code side. They're not tightly coupled to one code base or whatever. And they seem to be cost efficient if you do it right. So I guess this is also clear, yeah? For me, in decoupled architectures, the highest perk would be the agility mode, so that you really can decouple the team and every team can just work on the service or on the user experience itself, gaining flexibility and independence. So that's, for me personally, I would say the most important topic in that case. But if you decouple infrastructures in general, and you're running microservice architectures, or let's say architectures based on capabilities, you're also running in some drawbacks. Who's running distributed architectures on your side? Hands up. 3, okay. So you might saw, if you run distributed architectures, topics like, let's say, hassles with data structure, synchronization delays, or whatever. Because what is happening, basically, if you're decoupling infrastructures, that every service or each capability holds its own data source. You see it on the slide that we have, for example, microservice, we have the ERP as more or less capability or monolith, PIM capabilities, and so on and so forth. And each service or business capability is holding basically his own data set, which is quite tricky to orchestrate it in a user experience. Yeah. So you always have to ask yourself, where's the single source of truth from the data, and which record is the record which I'm displaying for the user. So this is basically the drawback if you're running into that. And there is one topic which is super important. If you do that at scale, it's getting really complex. So the more data sources you add at the bottom line, you will run into the issue that you are basically having this synchronization issue. And here, content federation comes into place. Yeah. So that means that we need a kind of unification layer where we have, for the decentralized application, our single source of truth for this data set. Yeah. And as mentioned, this will increase if the number of services will grow. So we have to do, or we have to ensure to some extent, data consistency to build engaging user experience. That's basically the core concept of it, which leads us to the point that we have to get coupled to get decoupled, which means at the beginning, we learned about legacy. Yeah, we're having all in one, then we slice it, and then we're running into that issue that everything is decoupled, the data sources are not synchronous, and so on and so forth. And right now, we have to some extent, pack it back. Yeah, and that means that we have to recouple the data while maintaining the architecture in that way that the source systems are independent. Yeah, and here we are basically relying on content federation, which means that content federation ensures that we're having a kind of, I would call it, yeah, let's say a standard for business objects, which we could fetch and just present for the users. Yeah, so we're keeping the data sources flexible and independent, but we're having one abstraction layer into the front end for the users. If I'm talking over content, I would say a kind of opinionated view on content. Content for me is not editorial content itself. It could be editorial content like SEO topics, blog posts, whatever. But content for me is basically, I would say, driven by business domains. And I try to present that in the following chart. So that means if I would like to have customer centricity and the user experience, which is basically top-notch, I need to think how I'm federating my content objects. And content objects are basically things like the product, the customer itself, or the order. Because if you're running distributed architectures, you have the issue that all those, let's call it content objects, are produced or consumed by different systems. I try to wrap it up like this. So you have on the product side, the ERP, the PIM, and the price engine, who are just feeding the product objects with an SKU number, with a description, or with a price, or something like that. And then you scale that up on the customer side, on the order side. So you see that's getting massively complex if you running distributed architectures or distributed capabilities, and you will end up into a topic that you have to orchestrate to some extent those content objects. Yeah, that's why I'm talking about content in an opinionated view. So I'm not talking only editorial content. I'm really seeing those, let's call it business content objects as a single source of truth, which we need to build a user experience in the end. And here exactly content federation comes in place. So that means if we're thinking over content federation and we're aggregating those topics into a kind of federation layer, then we're getting rid of those point-to-point connections. So that means that we have one storage in the middle who's just caching all the data. We're not infecting the source systems like the ERP, the monolith, or microservice itself, so they can run their own database in the end. And we have that federation layer in the middle, which is responsible for pushing out the data into the front end. Yeah. So that means that we're gaining more flexibility for the organization in that case. We're bringing just autonomy to the data layer. Yeah. And we're building basically user experience, which are, yeah, I would say engaging. And I would say that we need a kind of autonomy on the one side, but also unification on the other side. And exactly this is what we need in the modern stack from my perspective. By reflecting that, what we see on the market, people are basically, or organizations are basically putting the efforts in my perspective and other perspectives on the wrong side. That means typical IT investments are exactly going into that integration custom middleware layer, which we call federation, yeah. But they are not spending so much money on the digital experience, where you really should basically put your money in to differentiate in the end. And that means, on the long run, that you please don't build such a federation layer on your own, rather buy it and customize it. Yeah? So wrapping that up into perks, I would say content federation has the perks that we're really increasing the flexibility and agility, that we're reducing the complexity itself. And I would also say that we're reducing or increasing the security, because we abstract the data and have just another data set on that, yeah, without decoupling or without doubling the data. Sorry for that. Basically, those are my, I would say, opinionated views on the topics on content federation. So this was pretty fast wrap up in that case. And I would also say that content federation is not only a technical topic. Yeah? As we start content federation projects, or let's say projects in that area, we always observe that this is more an organizational project rather a technical project, because if you keep in mind those content objects, you're discussing more with the business. How is a SKU or let's say a customer driven from which attributes and so on and so far. Rather do a technical implementation. Technical implementation is doable, but the rest is more tricky in that case. As we learned at the beginning, we're coming from the legacy path, going for decoupling, try to overcome all the challenges by decoupled architectures, thinking that this should be the holy grail, which serves us on the long run. But basically, my last take on that is that our decisions from today, how we design architecture, are basically the legacies from tomorrow. And with that closing note, I would thank you and say, yeah, open the door for Q&A questions, so to say. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. You need to use the microphone so I can record the questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Very exciting. I would like to understand, I could imagine that many departments could become involved, because so many different systems, the bigger the organization, the more departments. So who is the decision maker, or who is in charge of making such a transformation project?
Yeah, pretty good question. I'll try to go back to the slide with the business order, with the content objects. So it's pretty lagging, to be honest. I'm in presentation mode here in the content objects, which I would like to show you, but it's not moving forward. Give me a sec. Is it moving on your side? Yes. So we have to go to that topic. Andreas, you analyzed it pretty good. So on an organizational level, you have to see it from my perspective, from a user journey perspective. So who is owning the user journey, or the journey from the product side, from the customer side, or from the order side? That doesn't mean that this is the IT department, the e-com department, or whatever. That could be the case that the customer is owned by the, let's say, marketing department, and the order is owned by the logistics. So you open up, I would say, kind of organizational Pandora box, which is more organizational driven, rather IT case. And this is, to be honest, also the tricky part, because you need a kind of consulting capability. You can't just say, okay, normally product is looking like that. You have the following colors, attributes, sizes, you name it, you get it. Rather understanding how the product is moving through to the life cycle. And then there is a second topic, which means I wouldn't build up that one product model which fits all. You will fail with that. Rather thinking in use cases, meaning you have that business domain, which is called product, and maybe you have different, let's say, use cases for product, which is one is more relating to the purchasing side, and the other one is more related to the selling side. And then you're basically building two models on the same use or on the same content object, but for different use cases. Yeah. Yes.
So your federation layer is read-only, or is it read-write, or modify, or?
Basically, the federation layer should be read-write. Yeah, exactly. Because you have the write operations from the read operations from the front end, or from, let's call it, user touch points like apps, website, etc. On the write operations, you mostly have source sets of systems. And best case, your federation layer can do subsets of data sources, which means on that example, you might have a legacy ERP, which will never talk to an app or website directly. So the federation layer has to cache it and has to build a data model in that case. But maybe you have a PIM, which is able to expose APIs, yeah, GraphQL, REST, whatsoever, and you just have to cache the data. So that means an intelligent federation layer is able on the one side to store data, on the other side just to fetch and cache the data. So you need always read-write operations. I would say that headless CMSs are pretty okay-ish for that, to model those objects, but you have to have a look that those CMSs are able to read and write operation, or read and write, because most of the times those CMSs are just optimized for reading and not for writing. And if you do that at scale, you should have both in that case.
Second question, do you have any commercial products recommendations for federation layer?
Well, that's a hard one, to be honest. So without spoiling some advertisement, if you're just going for the federation layer itself, you can choose product like GraphQL, whatever, which is actually serving the caching layer in that case. Then you have to build, to some extent, the data modeling below, because this problem is not solved. There are products on the market which are serving that. So that's why I'm referring to that CMS case. We're looking personally strong on HighGraph. HighGraph has the ability to do reads and writes, but also have the ability to have the GraphQL on top of it. Downside of that model would be that you are tightly coupled within one system where you have the data modeling plus the API layer on it. So meaning, in an idealistic world, you would decouple as well the API layer from the federation layer. That would be super decoupled, but this is also gaining complexity. So in the step between, that's why we are personally using HighGraph pretty strong in projects, is exactly combining that. Yeah? So that would be the suggestion without getting paid for it. Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. It was quite insightful. I see, including the federation layer, basically you are also introducing a single point of failure, right? In a way. So if the federation layer is not reachable, then all of a sudden all the ecosystem is not working anymore, not a single application. Which strategies would you suggest basically to mitigate this risk and to reduce this, fatal event, basically?
I would say that you have the same risk if you're just running microservice itself, because if you think over the term that the microservice is holding the data, you also have to make sure that there is data consistency, failovers, and so on and so forth. That's why I said I wouldn't build that on my own. There are products on the market, and then you have to just replicate that in the infrastructure itself. One topic which you can do, you can choose products which are available on the market. They're serving availability, failovers, and so on and so forth. On the other side, you can host it on your own and build some failover clusters in that case. But you're right, that's a single point of failure. But if you just strip that down to the lower point of a microservice, you have the same issue. It's just a matter of question where you move it, you know? So this is basically the term of it. Yeah. And I would say for 80% of the companies, I would try to purchase such a solution. Don't take care about operations and so on and so forth, because you are not differentiating. So this is really the crucial message basically is this one. Yeah. So you shouldn't put IT investments into things which the customer can't or your stakeholders can't observe. Because if you see that from a CIO, CTO perspective, what are you doing? You're building your middle layer. You're just grabbing your whole IT team, going into the corner, working 9 months without seeing something for the stakeholder perspective, you know? So if you put your efforts on the digital experience, building another app, another website, whatever, where you need the data on the crosscut, then you can also present something to the stakeholders, getting more money for new projects in, and so on and so forth. So that would be the crucial take here.
Cool. If there are no more questions, maybe I use the time to ask one last question.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm not a technical person, so I'm coming from the business side. And for me, since you worked at Lampenwelt, you probably know the whole private equity game, which is very cost-driven. How do you convince management of the ROI of these projects? Because, I mean, it doesn't have an immediate effect on either costs or revenue. So how do you do that?
Pretty good question, to be honest. You have two angles, I would say. One angle is that which we discussed right now, meaning how fast can we build new user experience? Because we're basically able, if we have that federation layer in place, to connect data much faster. Yeah, so we can build another app within 2 days because data and the object is aggregated, and we don't have to pick the data here, there, everywhere. You know, so you're just shortening the time to market. The tricky part is that you once have to come into that game really delivering on an MVP and just showing to the shareholders we're able to do it, rather to do the full project, defining everything into the last topic, which will take some time. And this is a never-ending project, to be honest, yeah, because you're always redefining your business objects in that case. and then showing value. So this would be the strategy, how I convince the shareholder, meaning what is the time to market, how fast can we ship features later on compared to the actual situation, and then you can define some metrics on it. So that's how I would approach it.
Thank you. We were talking a lot of technologies or systems and data, and regarding the discussion about the ROE, what was missing for me was the user or the people, because legacy is binding the people. The power cannot be released for innovation, and this could be a good point to discuss when you want to convince management about ROI.
Yeah.
About integrating such solutions that the people are free to drive innovation in the project.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's basically also referring to that chart which we had at the beginning, which is that IT budget dilemma, how we called it. Yeah. So we have the headroom, so to say, for going forward and building other topics rather operating on legacy. Exactly. Alrighty.
Great. Then, thanks a lot, Markus. That was